Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is This is Not About Pepsi. And the title is based on a thing that happened this week. I wrote an essay a few weeks ago called The Eagle Has Landed. And the eagle has landed, just in case anyone doesn't know, that's the phrase Neil Armstrong famously said, the lunar landing. And the essay that I wrote with that title was not about Apollo 11 or lunar. It was not about that. It was about the Big Bear bald eagle nest cam 1. That's Jackie and Shadow and the chicks. And it was also about what has been happening in our government because, of course, bald eagles are our national symbol for the United States, for democracy, and all of that. So, and the sort of accomplished mission, because that's what that phrase has come to mean, right? The eagle has landed means like we've had a successful mission. We've achieved what it is we set out to do. The mission that I was referring to was sort of this, what has happened here, that we are dealing with these people who have taken over our government and are essentially dismantling it. And just all the havoc that is being wreaked here, we're being wrought here rather. And, the pain and the confusion and the shock, and I think the heartbreak, the onslaught, the daily onslaught of what we are dealing with. And that's what I was writing about. And that has continued to be, just every week there's something else going on. We had the Signal chat last week was sort of like the big story. And there's so many big stories every week that it's even hard to say what the big story of the week was because it's just devastating. There's so many things happening that are just so hard to process. And I think that's by design. And so that continues to be the case. And because of that, some of us here are really having a hard time. There are people here who continue to be happy about what is happening. And that also makes it really painful for those of us who feel wildly, just have a whole different take on what is happening. And, there is this element of just like, how do I go about my day when I see democracy on fire here and I see people who are being denied due process or different rules apply to different people. We're going to not police people's speech. We would, free speech if we're talking about hate speech on meta platforms and, X. But, if you express your opinions and this administration doesn't like them, even if you have a green card and you are a legal permanent resident, you can be deported in the middle of the night without a warrant, without anything. So different rules for different people. And, the problem here, and I talked about it, and I've been talking about it, is when you start to say, I don't care if that person was denied due process, you are missing the point. You're falling into the trap because it's a precedent. So as soon as you say, it doesn't matter to me if some people are denied due process, what you're doing is you are eroding everyone's right to due process. And it is only a matter of time before that is not a right we can count on anymore. It's already happening. It's already happening. And so that's the problem. And this administration is very carefully choosing cases that are divisive and that their supporters they know that there's not going to be pushback, and they're testing the limits here. They're testing, what they're going to be able to get away with before people stand up and say, no, not that. And now we've got tariffs on everyone. And, it's a constant, there's just more things happening all the time. Our allies are completely alienated from us. And, our closest neighbors, Canada, is upset with us. The EU, it's just, yeah. So a lot of people here are not doing well. And other people are very happy, apparently. So it's painful. It's difficult. And I wrote this essay a few weeks ago, The Eagles Landed, and basically what happened is the other morning I woke up and somebody had left a comment under it, this woman, and she was upset. And she said, I clicked on this because I thought it was going to be about the meme slash message, which I think she meant the title. And your article had nothing to do with that. And it was like clickbait and very disappointing. And it reminded me of MSM, of the mainstream media and clickbait. And I was just like, clickbait? What? So clickbait and mainstream media, this may be something you're like well aware of, but titles and clickbait, that's generally going to be something like really salacious or provocative to get somebody to click so that they can show high engagement, so that corporations want to buy ad space so they can make money. It's, you want to show this like high traffic and lots of clicking so that these giant corporations want to advertise, have banners, have ad space on your mainstream media. And so there'll be things like the title, it'll be very upsetting or very provocative or very whatever. And then people will click on it. And sometimes the article is not at all that. Well, this is not, the eagle has landed. If you actually clicked on the essay, first of all, there's a thumbnail of an eagle, and then it's all about the bald eagles, and then it's all about our government, and it's very clearly, a play on that. But I could tell that it was like, and so I responded to her. I was like, I honestly, like, what? And then I just basically said, like, listen, no one is buying ad space, and certainly like not my intention. Why would I want to choose titles that are going to upset people? It's like, there's no benefit to me, and I hope your day gets better, kind of a thing. And then I walked away and I was doing other things, and then I thought, maybe this woman is just really having a tough morning. Like maybe she is just having a really tough time right now. And maybe she honestly thought this was going to be about Neil Armstrong, and she clicked on it and it wasn't. And it was just that one thing that pushed her over the edge today, No one else seemed to be confused. I stand by my title. But my heart went out to her because I feel like so many people are just not okay. And so I went back and I softened my response. And I'm doing a lot of that kind of thing lately. And that's what my essay this week, and that's why my title was, This Is Not About Pepsi. Because I was writing about this sitter that I had when I was in the 4th grade. I was 9 years old, and she only came to my mom's 3 times. And I think she was either 18 or 19. It was her first year at Hunter College. I'm pretty positive about that. And I think she was from the Midwest. And I do not remember her name. I remember that she had beautiful, curly, thick red hair and freckles. And she was she was just fun. And she would talk to me about everything, anything, and things well beyond my years. And I was describing that in the essay. I remember her telling me that she liked to make out with boys and she liked to make out with girls. But she said to me, no one will ever get you off the way you get yourself off. I remember that. And I had no idea what she was talking about, but I nodded seriously because I wanted her to think I was cool, And at a certain point, she was telling me like Pepsi and milk together, like best combination ever. And she thought it was funny that I called Pepsi soda and she called it pop. And she said she would bring Pepsi with her the next time she came. And she remembered the next time she came, she brought the Pepsi with her. And when my mom and stepdad left for the night, we went running to the kitchen and she grabbed a glass and she poured milk, like half a glass of milk into this glass. And then she poured the Pepsi on top of it. And it started to really bubble like quickly, like a science experiment. It was easily going to like go over the edges and onto the floor. And I took it and I put it over the sink because my mother you did not want to be spilling things in my mother's house. And so it, spilled into the sink and it was, she was laughing. She said, gulp it, gulp it. So I did. And it was I was shocked by how bubbly it was. And I was so surprised that I snorted as I was swallowing and the Pepsi milk combination came out my nose. And then we were laughing for like, I don't even know, 10 minutes. I had tears streaming down my face. I was laughing so hard. And I remember in the midst of that being worried because I had gotten some of this like Pepsi milk, whatever, onto my shirt. This was the kind of, my mother was very, spills were a big deal. I had to be neat. I had to be perfect. So having somebody come and babysit who was just like fun and like, doing fun things was so great for me. It was such a different kind of energy than what I was used to. And laughing and squealing like that, it's just not how things were in the house. And so I remember, just loving her and being so excited when she was coming. And I remember like cleaning everything up. I can still remember the taste of this Pepsi milk combination, even though I only had it the one time and probably wouldn't recommend it. But, I can still kind of feel that. It was almost like burning in my nose, that bubbly burning feeling in my nose. And just, it kind of occurred to me like the way memory works and how interesting it is and the things that stay with you and the people that you remember, even though I can't remember her name. And it, got me thinking about like where she is and what happened to her. And I then didn't want to I want to think she's good out there somewhere, and she would be, because she's got to be, like 8 or 9 years older than I am. She's got to be postmenopausal by now. And I was just thinking like, I don't want to think about all the things that could have happened to her in this world as a woman, as a young girl. Even the time that I knew her, she was only 18 or 19. There's a million things, right? But I was just trying to stay with something hopeful, like maybe she's like in her house in Idaho and she's setting the table waiting for her kids and grandkids to come for dinner. Or maybe like she's married and her wife is in the other room singing off key, and she's laughing and thinking, well, she can't sing, but at least she knows how to get me off, like whatever, I was just trying to have like some hopeful thoughts here because I struggled this week. It was a tough week for me for a variety of reasons. All of the above, like all the things that are happening here, of course. And I also I'm going through perimenopause myself. I'm 54. And so I never know if I'm going to have a cycle or not have a cycle. And I'm going to be really open about this stuff because I feel like we don't talk about it enough. What was happening for me the last few months is I was getting like a cluster of migraines when I would get my cycle. And I would sometimes get it for a day, and then you just don't know what's going to happen. Like you have no idea. And sometimes you don't get it, or you'll get it for a day, and then you don't get it, and then you get it the next week. I mean, it's just like good luck figuring out what's going to happen. You have no idea. But the migraine, the hormonal part of that was causing sort of like clusters of migraines, which I haven't had for years. It's really, my migraine situation has been well handled for a long time. And over maybe like starting, I would say about 6 months ago, that started to not be the case, where I was just having weeks sometimes where just every day I was, really in a lot of pain. And so I went to the doctor about 3 months ago now, and she was amazing. She's one of these doctors who really listened to me. She's from New York, always gotta love that, and she just really she had empathy, and she took her time, and she was asking me follow-up questions, and it was so incredible that I got emotional there in the office with her, because I realized it had been a very long time since a doctor actually listened to me and cared about what I was saying. And I didn't feel like I was fighting to be heard or believed at all. And she said, I want to put you on a very low dose of Topamax, which is an anti-seizure medication, but it's also used for migraines. And she's a very, very low dose, but it has been incredibly effective, and it might just solve this, and it has. So I started taking that about 3 months ago, and the first month I got one migraine with my cycle, and that's how it's been. Of course, again, my cycle, quote unquote, being very unpredictable. But this week I had just and so sometimes I still need to take my migraine medication, which is rizatriptan. So I woke up on Monday and I had a really bad migraine and no rizatriptan. I'd run out, which I never let happen, but that's what happened. And so it was kind of like a perfect storm. Waking up with one is never good because it's gotten going. And by the time it was basically 2 days of intense pain. And because I didn't have the rizatriptan, I was trying like every other thing I could think of. I took 2 Benadryl before I went to bed. I did all the things. And so it was kind of like in this real pain fog for a couple of days. And that is the state I was in when I saw that comment, about the clickbait and and I was just kind of like, wow, okay. So maybe that's like the state, maybe she's not okay. And I think a lot of people are not okay. And that's what I've been trying to do as best I can, is just give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm always trying to do that. I've been practicing yoga for 34 years now. I've been teaching for a really long time. If I'm not going to go the extra mile to try to have compassion for people, then I don't know, we're in trouble, right? That's the whole point of this practice. So I do my best to try to be helpful, and I think ultimately where we are in this world and what you can see is that it's people's actions that make the biggest impact, and they do matter. Cory Booker this week got on his feet for 25 hours and spoke about democracy and about this country and about the rule of law and about just where we are and what's happening right now. And that has an effect, and I was trying to really stay with that and stay with what happened in Wisconsin, like to just kind of remind myself when I'm teetering on that edge of despair, which I was, because of all the things that are not easy to see, like women in Georgia getting arrested for having a miscarriage, which is, I linked all this stuff. So if you're ever like listening to the podcast, and you're like, wait, what? You can just go to the essay and you'll see these things are linked. But yes, women are now getting arrested in Georgia for having natural miscarriages. If they don't dispose of the fetal tissue, not that there's anything written anywhere about how you're supposed to do that, but that this woman was investigated because of that. And they're contemplating, the death penalty for women who have abortions now. And you have girls in Texas who there is no exception for rape or incest. I just, my heart literally breaks for people. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to say anymore. It's like, you have a situation where you've got, like, I tried to have these conversations before the election where I was saying, like, look, if you're talking about being pro-life, but then what about like the life of the mother? I mean, her life also should matter to you, right? And if we've got women going to the ER having miscarriages and the doctors can't intervene and give them life-saving health care because of these really restrictive abortion bans and their fears of being thrown in jail or having their medical licenses revoked or, incredible fines that they're like, this is not good for anyone's life. And we have maternal and infant mortality rates rising in these states. And we have doctors fleeing these states because who wants to practice like that? And we have medical residents who don't want to do residencies in these states. So now you have women who are dying to be pregnant, who want to be pregnant, who want to have babies, and they can't get good prenatal and postnatal care. I mean, it's just, this is not a good situation. But no matter how I tried or what I said, I had so many conversations with people. And they would say, I want, small government, and I let the states decide. We're giving it back to the states. Okay, so you're giving it back to the states. And now we have this situation. We have women getting arrested when they have miscarriages. And we have, a state contemplating the death penalty for, like, this is what you get, when you leave it to the states. You have women who are dying to have babies, and then they have a pregnancy-related complication, and they go to the ER because they're hemorrhaging, and they're not being helped, or you have like a woman who is literally currently going through a miscarriage right now and cannot get any medical help. She's being sent home and may end up with sepsis because doctors are afraid to intervene. This is not good. And at the same time, you have these people who are talking about, I like small government, I want the states to decide. The Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, is now investigating the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department because 2 private citizens sued saying that they're waiting too long to get their concealed carry permits. So, let's try to get this straight here. So when we're talking about girls and women and their rights to bodily autonomy and life-saving health care, we're going to leave it to the states. We like small government. But if we're talking about, everybody's rights to get a permit so they can walk around with a gun, well, God damn it, the government will step in and make sure you process those permits quickly. It's like, it's different rules for different people. And I think it is, it's whatever rules I want, whenever I want them. I'll use the rules any way I want. When I don't like the rules, they don't apply. When I like the rules, they apply. It's just, this is not how things work well for people. And I think that ultimately, when you talk about a society, when you talk about, constituents, you're talking about people. You're talking about human beings and how they behave and what they do. And then you've got Jim Banks, right, in Indiana, the senator, and a whole bunch of people, as you all well know, have been fired. Federal employees have been fired. And a lot of these firings have been ruled like as illegal because so many of those probationary firings that have happened, they were without cause, without notice. People just, bam, thousands of people fired. And, a lot of those people have had to be rehired, and it's been a mess. But one of these people, Mac Schroeder, he went to find his senator, which is what, these are public servants, okay? They work for the people. They don't just work for the people who voted for them. They work for all the people. Same thing with the president. That's how this is supposed to work, folks, right? The president doesn't just work for the party who voted for him. Unfortunately, in our country, I can say him because we've never had a her. But you're supposed to be the president for everybody. You're not supposed to be like, I'm going to deny federal funds to your blue state because I don't like the way you're speaking to me. I don't like your rules. It's like, this is not a game. This is not high school. It's the most childish, bunch of people I've ever entitled unbelievably unfit people to be making decisions for an entire country. But this is what it is. They're just human beings. And that's, ultimately what I was writing about this week is that people and the way they behave has such an impact on everyone around them. You've got the people that are going to like show up with the Pepsi and milk and make you laugh until you're snorting soda out your nose. And you have the people who are going to, like, Jim Banks, tell this guy who shows up and says to him, by the way, that's your constituent. You work for this person. He's been fired illegally. And he shows up to talk to his senator and he says, hey, I was illegally fired and I'm really worried because the work that I was doing was making sure the most vulnerable people in our state were being cared for. Those are people, disabled people or people who are uniquely abled, whatever, however you want to, and a lot of senior citizens. Are you going to do anything to make sure they're okay? And this man turned to him and said, I'm sure you were fired because you deserve to be fired. And he said, why? Really? Like, why are you assuming I deserve to be fired? He said, because you look like a clown. Like, zero compassion, zero empathy, zero care for his constituents. It's like that behavior is so unbecoming of somebody holding a serious job like that. And he just showed like he doesn't understand the job that he's holding. This is not how you speak to people. You don't speak to people with that lack of respect and compassion, consideration, sensitivity. That's not leadership. That's like high school bully. I mean, it's just pathetic, honestly. So, those are all the things that were on my mind as I was writing, and so much more. We have people who are like, who were denied due process and sent to El Salvador, and you're finding out like, oops, clerical error, and now this man with no criminal record is in a mega prison where they see the light of day for 30 minutes every 24 hours. And, it's just like, and then the federal government, this administration admits this was a clerical error, really? And they're like, but we can't do anything about it now. We're powerless to do anything about it now. It's like, it's very hard to, to stay hopeful. It's hard. It's a lot of work. And sometimes it's just, you're done in, you're done in because you're looking at all these really scary things that are happening right now that are beyond just, where you have the people holding the highest offices in our land and they're bombing people and then like exchanging fist bump emojis, and they've just bombed in a civilian territory and children died. These are not serious people. This is not okay. We've got like this tariff situation going on. Penguins are being, there's like tariffs on, I mean, it's just not, I don't know. Like, I really don't say anymore. And every marginalized group in our country is scared and trying to figure out, what do I do? What should I be doing? How can I fight back here? How can I keep myself safe? How can I keep my family safe, my children safe, my daughter safe? Like, what do I do? How do I keep my neighbors safe? Am I supposed to be like thinking about an exit plan? I don't want to leave my country. I don't want to do that. And you try to talk to people, who voted for this, and you say, aren't you worried? Like, if what Congress says doesn't matter anymore, if they create agencies and appropriate funds and the executive branch could just come in and say, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're defunding that whole thing. We're closing that down with an executive order. We're firing thousands of people at a time because we feel like it. We're sending an unelected billionaire in with 6 kids with flash drives. If the Congress has no power anymore and they are going to ignore court orders, so the judiciary has no power anymore, are you not concerned? Like, you're fine living in a dictatorship with this guy at the helm and these people that are ready to take over when he can't do it anymore? You're fine with that? You're fine with a third term? He's talking about a third term, and that doesn't disturb you? Think it's funny? You think it's funny? The woke liberals are crying their tears. You're laughing. You think it's funny. Okay. You know what? Like, okay. I'm not bothering with those conversations anymore. With people who are celebrating this stuff. You think it's good that we're firing the scientists who were tracking measles, that we haven't had deaths from measles since 2000, and you think it's good that we're firing thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, that we're going to track that and make sure we're, okay, I don't know what, I can't have those conversations anymore. So that it is not easy here. And so what happens a little bit for me is that I have realized that I tried for a very long time to keep communicating, because I don't want to, I don't want to be that person that's like, okay, I'm done. I'm done trying to communicate. But when you have spent a tremendous amount of time, like really trying, really saying, hey, look, I understand there were some things that you were not like okay with. Let's have that conversation, or when you say things like, hey, I would have been fine if they wanted to send like accountants and economists in, like a bipartisan, team of people with oversight to Congress and the American people to try to surgically get rid of waste and fraud. I would have been so down for that. But this situation, like, no, I'm not okay with, you absolutely won't have that conversation when you try to have these, you show facts about like maternal and infant mortality rates going up in the states with restrictive abortion bans, and you talk about, no exceptions for rape or incest, and there's absolutely no willingness to have that kind of conversation. It's just, you get to a point where like, okay, no matter what I say or do, there's zero there's just no willingness to actually have a conversation. Like, I'm listening, I'm hearing what you are saying, and I'm, responding, I'm taking it in. I'm really trying to think about how things would be for me if I grew up in the family of origin that you did, if I grew up in the culture that you did, if I grew up hearing the things that you did. I understand we all have our influences and our, different spheres that we're existing in. But there is no reciprocity on that. It's just not there. I've tried. Believe me when I tell you, I have tried and tried to have these conversations, and it's just, there is no conversation to be had. And it's not really surprising, because when you're talking about voting for people who would say things like they're eating the cats and dogs in Springfield, like legal Haitian immigrants are eating the cats. You already ought to know there's not going to be a bridge to stand on. Or when you're talking about a man who says, I grab women by the pussy, like, you should know already there's not going to be a bridge to stand. Like, I could never vote for somebody who would speak about women that way, ever. So it's like there isn't going to be a bridge. So it's not really that surprising. So I'm done. I'm done trying to have those conversations. It's like, the door's open. If you ever want to try to have a conversation and talk about these things, I will. But like, I am not expending my energy anymore trying to, trying to present more. It's like, if you can't see now, looking around, what's happening to people and why this isn't okay, I can't help you, because, I don't know. You're living in a different reality than I am. It's really obvious to me. It's just like, all you have to do is open your eyes and look around. So, you're looking at the same stuff I am. So if you're drawing different conclusions, there's nothing we can do. But in the essay, I was just sort of talking about like that idea of community and of showing up for people. And one of the things that I was touching on that I think is, worth digging into a little bit is this thing that I've certainly had happen in my life where there's a line between having compassion for people and allowing yourself to be mistreated. And I have sometimes, not for a long time, but in my personal life, certainly in my like 20s and 30s, I went way too far with that, like where I really would be in relationships with people. I'm not just talking about romantic, like friendships, familial, where it's like I was accepting treatment that was absolutely not okay, and excusing the other person's behavior and just saying, well, they've had a lot of trauma. They're, they just they can't do it. They can't communicate. They can't, they're not going to be able to say they're sorry. And I went through a lot of that with my mom. She was someone, I've talked about this before, but she just was not somebody who was able to have those difficult conversations. So she would, if something went down, certainly a lot of the time if she was drinking and she would scare me, or she would, come after me or whatever. Like, she would not, then the next day, I learned quickly as I was growing up that if I ever even referenced what had happened, it was absolutely not acceptable. There was not going to be any acknowledgement that anything had happened, that any like wrongdoing had happened. It just none of that stuff was going to occur. She just wasn't gonna be able to acknowledge that or face it or own it or apologize. That just was not going to just wasn't going to happen on any level. And it was painful. It's like when especially it's your mom and you love your mom and you're trying to figure out like what's real or, why something is happening the way that it's happening, or why when you're a kid like that and your mom's angry with you or yelling at you or coming at you physically, you don't know it's because she's been drinking. You think it's like something you did wrong, or some way that you are not measuring up, or just that you've been bad in some way, or that you're broken in some way, or you're unlovable in some way. And it's painful, and that is very much how I grew up. I felt for a very long time like my mom doesn't love me. And if my mom doesn't love me, then there must be something like really deep in my core that is unlovable. And when you have that kind of like core belief or fear, and you're always afraid of being left or being rejected or being shut out, and she was the queen of that, she would just like, she was the person who would, shut you out. I told that story not too long ago of, when I was like 5 years old, I was missing my grandmother. I wanted to see I don't know what had happened with my mom. I don't know what had happened that night or what had gone on, but I know that I was really upset and I was crying, and I said I missed my grandmother who had died, and I said I wanted her, and my mom was like, well, you can't have her, she's dead. And I then said I wanted to see my Aunt Louise, and it obviously really triggered her, and she took my little suitcase and shoved all my clothes in it and put me outside the apartment and slammed the door and left me out there for 45 minutes, just like wailing and, pounding on the door. And it's like one of those core memories, unfortunately. And I think it really, it just stayed with me. And I have done so much work, so much work on that stuff. I did not want to be somebody who, it wasn't just that, it was also like my grandmother had died, and my parents, prior to that event, prior to my grandmother dying, my mom and my dad were in the apartment together. Like, three of us lived together, and we saw my aunt, my uncle all the time, and my 4 cousins, and we saw my grandmother all the time. And basically what happened inside of a week is my grandmother died, my dad left, and my mom took me to this farm, which it was a friend of hers, and left me there for I don't know how long. Certainly many days, maybe longer. I'll never know. But so that had all happened, and then I was back home with her, and then we had this event where she put me outside the apartment. So I learned not to express sadness, rage, I learned to make sure I was not upsetting her in any way. And when you're dealing with someone who's an alcoholic, who gets physical and is verbally, unkind, it's really painful. So you're thinking like, it's me, because you're a kid. You don't have any other way to make sense of it. And so I've done a tremendous amount of work. I did not want to be somebody who was like, okay, so I know all that, and so I have these abandonment issues and, whatever. I was like, okay, I know all that. I've done a lot of work. I did a lot of therapy when I was like I started when I was 13. I stayed in therapy pretty regularly till I was like 26. And then I had started doing yoga when I was 20. And I've just done a lot of like work over the years on all of this. And obviously when you're meditating and you're teaching yoga for 34 years, you're on like a healing trajectory. That's what it is. And self-study and trying to know yourself, right? So that you can be accountable for the energy that you're spreading and the way that you're behaving and the way you're showing up in the world. So I did not want to be owned by all this stuff that had happened when I was a kid. It was totally outside of my control. And awareness didn't feel like enough, right? Like, okay, so I know all that stuff about myself, but I don't want to be somebody who's like always worried and for a while, and then there's attachment styles, and that's really good information to have. And for a while in my 20s and 30s, I was anxiously attached, attracted to people who were avoidant. And that is a painful combination. It does not go well. And part of it is that repetition compulsion and trying to get your happy ending in like the present day. Thinking like, well, if I can get this person to love me, then I'll feel better about what happened with my mom or, whatever. It's like, does not work. So it's layered, right? There's all this stuff. I am now a securely attached person. I am not somebody who I'm not interested in that crap. It's like, I do not want to be in friendships where I'm chasing or I don't know what's going on or I can't, life's too short and I just can't. So, and I know myself, I'm a good friend. Like I'm a good person, I like the people that are in my inner circle, I will swing for the fences for those people. We'll do anything. So it's like, I'm not going to put myself in a situation with people that are like where I have to walk on eggshells, or I just have done too much of that in my life. And also like the ability to work through conflict with people is huge in a friendship, in any long-term relationship. You've got to be able to own it when you screw up. Look people in the eye and say, hey, I really blew that. Like, I am so sorry. And, I meant well, like I know where I was coming from. I just that was something that probably was for my for my journal. I did not need to be saying that out loud or whatever it is, or, a million other things that it could be, but just being able to own it when you blow it. I need that in my relationships with people. And I also am so there to give it. It's like, we're not going to get everything right all the time. We're just not. None of us are. And so I can't really, the mystery thing or the like, we're not communicating thing or the gate is going to come down. I can't do that. I had somebody in my life like that for 10 years. I loved her like a sister. I can't do the thing where you're upset and now the gate is going to come down and there's no communication. It's too painful for me. It's like being out in the hallway, as a little kid. I just cannot do that. I understand if somebody needs to like have a minute, like go for a walk, take a day, that's fine. But I think ultimately like ignoring somebody is really almost the worst thing you can do. It's just like, it's worse than yelling at someone. At least if you're yelling at somebody or you're saying, you really pissed me off, or, that was really not okay what you did. Like, at least you're acknowledging their existence as a person, So we all have our stuff and our things, but I think over the last few months, because there's been so much stuff for people to deal with, just coming at us constantly. And then everybody has their own personal lives going on, right? There's like what's happening in this country, and then there's whatever's happened. Not everybody listening is from this country. I totally understand that as well. But then there's like also whatever's happening in your own life. And the minute you project and assume anything, you're in trouble. So just because somebody is, whatever, like responding it in a way that like if I did, it would mean one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that's what it means for them. So it's like you got to be careful about all that. And so I basically, with this woman who left the comment, I responded. Sometimes I sort of actively decide not to pause and wait and come back, with compassion, right? Like sometimes I'm like, what? This moment is actually going to be better served if I'm just super like, I'm never going to be the person that is, I don't know. I'm always going to err on the side of like being kind. I'm not going to like lash out at somebody. But sometimes I do so much of that, like, okay, that is really not cool. But I'll like do a lot of the processing and then I'll respond very calmly. Some people you just block, right? Let's go there for a second. If we're talking about a stranger on the internet who's being totally abusive or aggressive or whatever, that's a block. You don't waste any energy on that at all. He's block, done. But when it's like not that, but it's just kind of like strange or like it's aggressive, but it's like a little bit weird or odd, you might decide to either ignore or whatever. But it made me think about like the people that are not strangers on the internet and the people that are like, people I genuinely care about, who like some of those people in my life, I am giving a lot of just like, hey, it is rough right now. So everyone gets a ton of slack. Like everybody gets slack right now. That's really how I've been just kind of going for months, because I know that I'm having a hard time. It's not easy. We don't have there is no rule book for this stuff. We've never been through this before. So everyone who feels the way that I do is having a hard time. Let's put it that way. So I'm just giving people a lot of slack. But I think that there comes a point where you're like, okay, so, but is it that? Is it like the situation? Is it this person's personal life? Or is it they don't want to hear from me? And they're like not responding because they don't want to hear from me. And if that's the case, like, would it be great for them to just say, I don't want to hear from you? Yeah, of course. I'd much rather people just like communicate directly, but not everybody's going to do that. I think I've just gotten to the point because things are really painful right now and difficult, where I'm just taking things at face value moving forward. I just can't continue to do that kind of mental labor where I'm like, maybe they're not okay. Maybe they just are, really struggling and they just can't. Like they just can't right now, and that's okay. Like, because it's not okay for me. You know what I mean? Like for some people, maybe it would be fine, but for other people, it's not. And I understand, like we're all doing the best we can, but some things work for some people and some things don't, and it's just like, I think that people generally do what they want to do. I think you can count on that. And I think that that's one thing that I think in relationships, in friendships and whatever, people are going to do what they want to do. And you can look at somebody's actions and that will tell the tale. And it shouldn't be really hard to tell if somebody cares about you as a person. Like that shouldn't be really like, you shouldn't have to tell yourself a story, or it shouldn't be a mystery, or it shouldn't be a thing where you're like, oh, I made this mistake and so I've ruined everything. Like if you can't make a mistake, if like that's enough to ruin everything, then there wasn't a lot there. You just kind of have to trust that the things that are really, meaningful and valuable, if they really are, they're going to be meaningful and valuable to both people. And both people will be invested in making sure that they don't, they don't fall to the wayside, or it's like relationships are living, breathing entities, right? They exist in the space between you and the other person. And if only one person is feeding that space, it's not going to work. So, I think that is because it's just so difficult right now. It's like, we don't have the mental energy, any of us, for mysteries. Like if you want a mystery, you'll go, find one to watch at night when you're when you're done. But mysteries with people right now, it's just like, oh, it's too painful, right? It's too painful. And I was thinking about that with the woman on the internet too. It's like I do want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm certainly not going to stop doing that. But there is also this element of, everybody, we all have choices in the way that we're showing up. And it does matter, right? The way you show up, it matters. And you can show up with Pepsi and milk, or you can, show up and leave a nasty comment, or you can ignore people. Like, there's a lot of things you can do. And it's just totally, everybody's making their own choices. And I guess, it's just like you've got to, for me right now at least, move toward the people that are, bringing the Pepsi and milk, is what I think. And I don't literally mean Pepsi and milk, because I don't drink Pepsi. Let's just be clear. I'm not a soda drinker. So just to be clear, because you have to be really literal these days, apparently. But community is everything, and knowing who has your back, I think, is really important, and letting people that you care about know that you care about them and you're there in any way, shape, or form. Like, it matters, and standing up for 25 hours matters, and you do want to hold on to the wins anywhere you can see them, yay, Wisconsin, like, it matters. But also let yourself feel all the feelings, and know who to call, or who to, like I was saying, the first person, when I got that comment, I screenshotted it and sent it to my friend Kate, and she does the same. She's a writer, like when somebody leaves a message, you're like, huh? And we had a laugh, because it was just like, I don't understand, like, what is even happening here. She gets some doozies also, where you're just like, wait, what is this person saying? Like, and it's good to have somebody that you can work this stuff out with, right? Those people that you can, like, call when you're just like, I just don't even understand what just happened in this interaction. I have no idea what's going on. Or those people that you can, like, break things down with 9 million times if you are in some kind of mysterious situation with someone where you're like, what is going on? I don't even understand anymore. You want to have somebody in your life, and thankfully I have people like that, and I hope you do too, where you could be like, oh, I am so sorry to be talking about this again, but it is, like, driving me nuts, right? Like, what do you make of this? I don't know, right? Like, to be able to have those really open human conversations and laugh is what enables you to get through the day. And I think that people who are honestly only thinking about what is good for them, they just don't understand that yet. They don't understand that yet. The people who can look around and be like, good, I don't care if those people are suffering, because I want what I want. It's like, wow, okay, well, good luck with that, because I got to tell you, we're all connected. Our fates are tied, whether you like it or not. Our fates are tied. And when you refuse to get that message, things get ugly. They get ugly. And it is only a matter of time before you feel that. And I guess some people are determined to learn that the hard way. For me personally, I am, like, so grateful for the community in my life and for the people in my life. For better or worse, I love all the way. I love all the way. And I'll never regret that. I just won't. I feel like, that's the best stuff that we get while we're here, is connection. And, sometimes you get hurt. That's okay. And I'd rather love all the way and get hurt. That is definitely my philosophy on this stuff. And I hope that you are able to find a protest on Saturday. Speaking of community and caring and getting out there and making your voice heard, and just finding, surrounding yourself with people who are gonna bring that good energy and make sure you're not feeling alone. I hope you're able to. I know some people cannot do that, and please believe me when I tell you, understand, not everybody's physically able to go out into a protest. Some people are not mentally, like, just going into crowds is not going to be okay. It's all right. There are other ways to make your voice heard and to support. So I don't want people to feel shamed or any of that stuff. But those of you who can get out there, I really hope that you do. I will certainly be out there marching. And I'm just sending you a lot of love. Try not to give up, faith. Don't give up hope. And when you're feeling like despair like that, like I was teetering on the edge as I was writing this week, reach out to your people, and you can reach out to me. I will always do my best to lift you up. And I'm just sending you a whole lot of love out there. Till next time.